statistics on this, Phil. Levitated by the human touch.
Here's the pass. Antonio's through. Chance of 4. What a goal! What a brilliant strike by Michail Antonio!
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Knees Up Mother Brown podcast. I am joined by the Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland to my Toby Maguire. It's Callum Goodall and Jack Elderton. How are we doing, gents?
Not too bad.
That was one of your better ones, I'll give you that.
That was a subtle youth joke. Well, that was really good. Unsurprisingly, this week we will be looking at that Arsenal game, the 0-0 Burnley. Looking forward to the games we've got coming up over the Christmas period, and a little bit of a quick transfer talk as we always do. I'll start off by reminding you where you can get in touch with us if you'd like to. All correspondence can be sent to either the email address, which I've got working now, just so you're all up to date on my email shenanigans. podcast@kumb.com. I say I've got working. Thank you, Graham. It's also the forum thread at kumb.com, and you can tweet the boss, who will pass it on, I assume, anyway, at least, at kumb.com. As ever, all words, no punctuation. So Arsenal, that was a frustrating game, Callum, I should say.
To put it lightly, yeah, it was painful to watch for most of it for various reasons. The team frustrated me, and then obviously when you weren't being frustrated by the team, you're being frustrated by the match officials who just really were the salt in the wound throughout.
It was certainly a weekend of controversial decisions that's flowed on to the midweek where certain teams seem to be getting favoured. Initial thoughts before we go in depth, Jack?
My head's not gone watching a football match like that since the Souček red card against Fulham.
Yes.
That's the last time I can remember my head going that bad. I completely lost my head in the last 30 minutes of the Arsenal
anyone
game.
who's seen my Twitter feed last night will agree that so went mine. I'm sure a couple of my friends, at least one who supports Arsenal, will listen in today, ready to feel the sieve coming off me. And I got it on WhatsApp, and I stand by everything I said. I mean, it's an interesting one. You get across the forum, across Twitter, it's fans disgusted, kind of put off football by what they saw last night. And I mean, you two are the kind of the brains of this. I can be the emotional fan, I suppose. They were a horrible unit of players. It was a horrible team from the second one. I mean, Tierney's never elbowed in the face. He goes down pretending he is. He gets Soufal booked doing so. People don't care about those ones, but the reason you care is because later on in the game, the punishment is told. I mean, Arsenal surrounded a referee who was very, very weak to it, hadn't pulled out a yellow card yet before he was surrounded, and went and had a peek down at Tierney, who was perfectly fine afterwards. It was an arm across the chest. It happens. And it was, I mean, this is where I will fall down on this sometimes, is you have to, the reason these players are encouraged to do this is because referees let them do it. And it was clearly going to work for Arsenal last night because they got given the encouragement by a very weak referee who allowed them to do it. And it just turned into an awful game of football. You come away from it at the end thinking, well, we lost, but at least we don't play like that.
Yeah, I think as well, one of the most frustrating things was there was, I think, maybe two occasions where I think maybe one might have been Fornals rolling around a bit and Antonio rolled around a bit. And it was almost as if like we were like, all right, sod it, we're going to just try it. But we got no luck from it. It was like, we were like, okay, well, when we roll around, we don't get anything. But if they roll around, I know it's partly the home crowd getting on top of him and stuff. And probably that plays a factor in it. But it was just frustrating that we almost decided, right, we're going to stoop to their level. It didn't work. And thankfully, we kind of nipped that in the bud and didn't carry on trying to be petulant.
The only time it did work was when Souček, and he may have been slightly pulled. He blocked him. And I usually get really annoyed watching a West Ham player dive, but actually at that point I thought, no, we're going to have to mix it up and do it as well. I do wonder whether we miss a Mark Noble, a Kevin Nolan in there, Jack, who go over and say, right, we've got to change, we've got to be more cynical, we've got to be more smart, in inverted commas.
We had to find a way to be more cynical in that game. Arsenal were, and I'm fine with using this term. It's cheating. It's total gamesmanship, right? Pressuring the ref from minute one, like you say, the ref never had any control of the game, which was incredibly disappointing, even just from a neutral perspective. As a referee, when you're being put under that much pressure, you have to exert some control back, book someone, or have a talk. Talk to the captain. Just do something about it. Don't just cave. for 25 minutes and allow them
Oh,
to
I wonder.
pressure
He
you.
probably didn't know who to talk to for Arsenal, did he?
No, I know. Yeah, probably. I did.
The
I did
leadership
notice he had a
committee.
very brief word with Lacazette and pointed to the captain's armband on his
Yeah.
arm, but didn't follow it up in any way. When then they continued to do the same thing afterwards. And a couple of things on what we've just talked about. Tierney isn't elbowed in the face; it's an arm across the body, like you say. But Fornals is elbowed in the face by Gabriel. It's an accident, but it's an elbow in the face. Actually connects with his face, and Partey does elbow Antonio in the face. Again, I think that's a foul by Antonio on Partey, but the elbow does connect with his face, unlike the Tierney challenge. So if you're going to book Soufal for not elbowing Tierney in the face, then I do think you have to then go and book Gabriel and Partey for elbowing Fornals and Antonio. Really, don't book any of them. The first yellow is ridiculous. It's just completely weak refereeing.
I think it cost us. Obviously, it cost us with the yellow card for the penalty. I think it cost up in the build-up to the goal as well. I think Soufal possibly tries to make a challenge. Has he not been booked? I think it cost us in the momentum of the game. They really got on top of us. And if we take away the emotional side, which we kind of have to do to analyse how we play, it was that momentum they had and the kind of ferocity of the way they went at us in our defence that. I mean, you've just watched the game back, Jack, and you've had a kind of live tweeting about it. Us under pressure at the back clearly was an issue yesterday.
Massively, probably our biggest issue throughout. I mean, Antonio is a separate thing, and that was a huge problem for us throughout the game and has been across a number of our games recently. But this back four who can certainly defend the box really, really well and did so throughout much of this game, they can't pass. I don't think there's one of them. And I like Soufal. I've advocated for Soufal to return to the team, but even him under pressure, he just panics. So on both sides of the back four, you've got fullbacks who aren't particularly. I mean, Masuaku's meant to be someone who's comfortable against the press and is press resistant, but again here showed no level of security in possession and was very, very. It's sort of even more frustrating with Masuaku in a way because his first decision sometimes is quite good. He can take a touch to relieve some of the pressure, but then he takes no care of the ball after that. So his pass is inaccurate. There's no attention paid to details like speed of pass or angle of pass or which foot you're passing to. So passing to someone's strong foot rather than their weak foot. These are things he just simply disregards once he beats his man, often with a nice little touch to get away from the first bit of pressure. Diop, completely different kettle of fish. This man just like runs away screaming when someone runs at him. So just literally wanted to punt the ball as far as he could upfield every time anyone ran anywhere near him. And then the problem with this is if you're going to do that, like, go on, get some welly on it, get it 60 yards up the pitch. Don't welly it and it only goes 30. He's not even clearing our own half every time he's trying to clear the ball upfield. He's not getting it anywhere near Antonio to give him a chance to run onto anything. And again, when you're hitting Antonio, really, do you want to be hitting Antonio for him to challenge an aerial duel? Or do you want to put it over the top of the defence and give him something to run at and allow us to push up the pitch and press the opposition? More the latter. But every time Diop went long, he's hitting the halfway line if he's lucky, which isn't getting us anywhere.
He did look to be kind of floating a ball in rather than sometimes. I mean, sometimes again, it must just be a game sense that sometimes you have to just see what hasn't worked and change what you do. Granted, your first instruction or your first idea may have been, we've got to try and get some possession. I can't play into midfield at the moment for whatever reason. I will ask about that, but so maybe I have to change it up. Granted, some of that will be down to Antonio, whose touch last night was at his poorest. I think there was. I mean, he's an inconsistent footballer at times. He always has been, even when he's good. But Christ, it feels worse when he's playing badly, doesn't it, Cal?
Yeah, it's been infuriating for a while now, as much of the fan base will attest to. I think Twitter has been awash with pretty strong criticism of him, and rightly so. You know, like one thing that really annoys me on West Ham Twitter particularly is just how, like, if someone's had like a good spell or has ever done anything good for West Ham, you then cannot criticize them ever. And like, people are like, you have to stand through them through thick and thin. It's like, no, I can like Antonio as a guy and respect what he's done for the club. And yes, he had a great start to the season. But if you don't call them out when they're crap, then they're going to think that it's acceptable. And I think that's also part of the problem, is that there is no pressure on him to perform well because he's not going to get dropped, because Moyes has no choice but to play him unless you start playing like people that aren't actually strikers, which I mean, that's not going to, I think we probably should, but it's not going to rub off well for Antonio, is he? If he gets dropped from the starting 11 for someone who's not even playing in their favoured position, like, what's that going to do for morale? But yeah, it was just dreadful. His passing was woeful yesterday. 25% was it in the first half, Jack, he said?
Yeah.
And then I think 50% across the whole of the game, which is, I mean, we've called out his passing metrics before on the podcast, but that is a new low for the whole season. So it just seems to be going from bad to worse. And I think I've not done it, but I'm sure if we plotted it on a sort of line graph, I think you would see a gradual decline of it just getting worse and worse, which is then like begs the question of at what point do you drop him? Because if it's a trend, then it would suggest that the next game is going to be even worse. So
You remember in primary school when you used to play with those neon shoot balls that were inflated massively? It just looked like every time the ball went to Antonio, someone had switched the ball out for one of those because it's just bouncing miles off.
The man needs a rest. More than anything else, he looked tired in the Burnley game. He's looked tired lately. I think that's a big problem of our squad composition. Is obviously that there's no option that will help him. It's not just pressure on his place, is it? There's no right. You really need 90, or you need a couple of games maybe where we work on some basics, or do something. Just get your mindset back, get some energy into your legs. We'll talk about December. This is a very difficult period, and we do have a small squad. But then tactically, I don't think anyone else really picked up the slack yesterday in that game, Jack. I don't know if you look at was that in midfield, for example, one of their poorer games, or
I think the midfield too really struggled. Souček and Rice. I do think the three ahead were all right. I don't think we had such big issues with, or I didn't certainly when I watched it the second time, with Fornals, Lanzini or Bowen, and certainly not Fornals and Lanzini. I thought both of those were quite good and were involved in most of our best moments at the other end of the pitch, and actually contributed quite a lot defensively as well. I felt more so one of the things that Arsenal did very well in the first 20-25 minutes was Ødegaard basically held hands with Rice and stayed with him wherever he went. And I think the effect that had is probably the first time I've seen this happen to Rice is when receiving the ball, just playing a first time pass back where it's come from, rather than having the willingness and the confidence to turn in possession, to receive and maybe take on his man. I think that the intensity of the Arsenal press and how close Ødegaard was to him actually made Rice shrink a little bit. And that's the first time I've seen him do that in a long time under pressure. And he completely drifted out of the game after that. And then when you look at the way our midfield is composed, a lot of people will then go and blame Souček and say, well, Souček didn't pass the ball forwards. What's the point, of having a defensive midfielder who can't pass, etc., etc. Souček's numbers this season continue to be a big improvement on last season. There's a 7% uptick in his short passing, a 6% uptick in his medium passing. He's getting better. As a progressive,
really good yesterday.
Yeah, he's getting better as a progressive player. And actually, out of the two of them, if you're looking at who passed the ball well into the final third and picked out nice switches of play, picked out sharp forward passes into one of the three behind Antonio, you're looking at Souček as that guy. And I think it's a little bit unfair that when these situations happen, when Rice is really meant to be the main play driver out of those two, that when he fades out of games, we just simply look at Souček and say, well, he's got to do more. That's not his job. And I do think he did a reasonable job of trying to pick up some of the slack from Rice in the first half, who, I probably that 45 minutes, the first 45 minutes, probably his worst this season, and probably the worst I've seen in a long time from him.
He wasn't the only one. I suppose if we look at the first half, look at the major threats, it was Saka on Masuaku felt like a lot of what was going on.
They definitely targeted our left side.
Yeah, they definitely targeted the left side. I suppose the question is what we did to solve that, and what was Masuaku up to the task? Because this is his second game in the Premier League at left back for us for quite a long time. It looked like for a while Moyes would rather play anyone there. Masuaku, he now has very little choice but to either play, it's Masuaku or youngsters. How do you think Masuaku stood up to the task then? Because he's getting a lot of criticism for. It feels like almost because of who he is more than what actually the realism of what happened, Jack.
I think he did quite a good job in the first half, coming under a lot of pressure. I actually think as a last line unit, the defence did really well across the board, really. Certainly the three, Dawson, Diop and Masuaku Sufal, maybe a little bit more questionable, but the three of the players who actually don't regularly play and three non-first teamers, I thought did quite well defensively in the first half. In possession, a completely different thing, but out of possession, quite a good job. The second half, a lot more issues with Masuaku. A couple of really poorly, I mean, this is something that he used to do, really poorly judged pressures, where he's charging up to try and get onto something that he's never getting to, committing to things a little bit early and allowing himself to be dribbled past. Really insecure post tackle, which can be one of the most frustrating things to watch as a football fan, when one of your players wins a tackle really well and then completely takes their eye off the ball and then gets tackled straight away after they've won it. So these things weren't such big issues in the first 45 minutes, but I think if you look at the 11 players and then 10 players that played after Sufal's red card, if I'm going to pick out someone who suffered most in terms of frustration and who let the kind of tide of the game and the momentum going against us get to them and start to undermine what they were doing well, I think Masuaku was probably the worst culprit of that. Just started to look a little bit rash in all of his decision making, as you would if you're starting to get really, really frustrated. So first half, not bad. I think good. I think he's been harshly criticised. I think he dealt well with an immense amount of pressure that Arsenal exerted down that side. But second half, some really major issues beginning to creep in, and certainly towards the end, very poor.
Is there anything that stood out to you, Callum, either watching or in the numbers, that you think contributed to what was not a great display overall, realistically?
From Masuaku?
No, from across the board.
Just generally.
I mean, if you've got Masuaku, it's perfectly fine.
Well, yeah. While we're on it, Well, on Masuaku, just to kind of reaffirm the idea that he was targeted. So across his career, but more so this season, he generally averages about 8 defensive duels per 90 that he's involved in. Usually wins about 50%. Yesterday, he was involved in 19 defensive duels, which is more than double. So clearly they were channeling it down that side. And he still won 58% of them, which, I mean, you want your left back to be winning more than that, obviously. But we know that Masuaku isn't the best defender. So it wasn't as though it was a subpar performance. I think he pretty much maintained the same level of performance, if not slightly better than we're used to, over a much more engaged match. He was engaged in the game way more than he would normally be asked to be, and generally you'd probably expect a drop off, particularly if they're not used to being involved in so much defending. You'd think there'd come a point where and we did start to see it towards the end of the second half, definitely, but I would expect his percentage to be way worse, given that he was involved in so much more activity, and it just wasn't. So yeah, I completely agree that I think it wasn't obviously his best performance, but it was of the level that we've come to expect from Masuaku now, I think. And yeah, just generally team numbers wise, there wasn't a great deal. One thing that I just get frustrated with at the minute is our complete, there's no consistency in our pressing from game to game. And I get that you have to try and change to certain oppositions and stuff, but the fluctuation in PPDA, so passes per defensive action, is really marked. And if you look at some of our best performances across the season, it's when we've had really good PPDA numbers. So for example, I think we're probably all in agreement that Aston Villa was probably our best performance of the season so far. And I think we had 5.3 passes per defensive action, which is extremely low. So we were on top of them for the whole game. And that's reflected in the scoreline. We absolutely blew them away. Some of our other ones, we pressed really well against Chelsea. Who else? Some of our Europa League games we pressed really well, and I guess that's to do with the strength of the opposition. And then you see in our poorer performances, we just completely drop off. With against Arsenal, almost 15. So that's a drop off threefold than the Villa game. So I would just like to see more consistency, because the proof is in the numbers. The pressing does work. Our best performances, there is a clear correlation between the pressing metrics. So I get that when you come up against stronger opposition, it might be more difficult, but then that's disproven because we pressed really well against Chelsea and got our rewards because we won the game. It's just frustrating to see. Obviously, I'm not a manager. There's definitely some thought into it. Maybe there's a bit of fear, and I guess when you go down to 10 men, you can't press as aggressively. But I would just like to see more pressing from the front, I think, would be my main takeaway numbers-wise. I don't know what you guys think.
I just wonder if is that something because the manager feels we can't maintain, especially at the moment, especially in December, and especially with injuries and fatigue, that whether that's part of it. I mean, I thought that we looked very tired against Burnley and was worried about this game on that instance. But then someone with fresh, we've actually got fresher legs up there, I suppose. Arguably, Jack, Fornals has had a couple of rests lately. Lanzini's relatively fresh into playing these 90 minutes. I don't know. Is that change to Lanzini worked for you so far?
Well, no, not in terms of results, but I think he's playing well. I think, there's two separate things there. Individually, I think he's performing well. Whether it's benefiting the team as a whole, I don't really know, because the results aren't there and we're not scoring. So it's hard to really say that his positive individual performances are helping us as a team. Again, this is a repeating issue in terms of who we pick at 10. You've got options with more dynamism than Lanzini, but less accuracy, and you've got Lanzini there as someone who's not going to lose the ball. He lost it once in the entire game against Arsenal. I think Cal said that. So keeps the ball really well, but perhaps isn't going to hit the box with the same speed or intensity as other players we have might do. I personally think, just on the pressing discussion, I think there's a couple of issues here. I do think we came to play against Arsenal. I don't think we came to sit back. I think it was actually just a wise decision from the players on the pitch, and sometimes you need to be able to recognise Arsenal are pressing us really intensely. We're not playing very well. We can defend our last line extremely well. We've shown that before. So we can drop in here and hold on to this 0-0. And I think we did a really good job of that up to half time. I think the awkward moment comes almost when they go in at half time. And I think there's some frustration there from the coaching staff of why have you allowed Arsenal to impose their game on us so much? Go out and impose yourselves on them. And, trying to readjust back to a higher press in the first 5 minutes of the second half was an absolute catastrophe.
That's where I was going to ask, on the goal, what is it happened? It looked to me like we'd slightly changed formation. Is that formational change, maybe getting caught cold? It could obviously be all of these. Is it just having tried to push up to try something new, we've immediately got caught and it's looked worse than it is? I don't know. I
think you look at the last 5 minutes of the first half and you're looking at a team that's playing a low block and clinging on for dear life. I mean, we're charging around, flying into into blocks literally on the last line in the 6-yard box. People are flying across the box, throwing their body in the way. Mainly Dawson, who, was absolutely incredible in the first half. The amount of last line tackles, 2 on Lacazette, 2 unbelievable blocks. The score could have been 3 or 4-0 at halftime if it wasn't for Dawson, and also a brilliant save from Fabianski, but particularly Dawson was amazing. So if you look at the way we're playing, you've just come off the pitch barely clinging on. Everyone's in the box. Everyone's putting in as much effort as possible to cling to that 0-0, and then suddenly you go out second half and it's a clear intention from the coaching staff to go and play much more of a 4-4-2 mid to high press. So now the gaps are massive. So you've just gone from being bunched up very close together in your own box to now man to man, spread out massive gaps across the whole pitch, looking to try and get close to people. And there was this horrible period for 5-10 minutes where we had no rhythm in playing that kind of way at all. So actually with the goal, it's quite funny because just prior to the goal, Antonio does really well. You can see the intention has been set out, go and press. So he goes and chases something down and resets Arsenal. And then it comes back the second time and you can see the cognitive processing. When you watch it back, you can see him backing off as he would have done it in the last 10 minutes of the first half, realizing that's the wrong thing to do, and then rebalancing himself, turning around and trying to run forwards to chase the ball. At that point, Lanzini's in completely the wrong space to be able to cover a forward option. So you've got 2 players who are now over-eager, because actually what we've started with, first player sets how you defend, remember. What the first player does always sets how you defend. So the first instinct is to drop. So everyone begins to drop. And then Antonio realizes that's not what I'm meant to be doing. So goes out to charge forward. Lanzini goes, Rice, Souček go. Suddenly there's massive gaps. And you get probably one of the easiest looking goals of the whole season, where it's just pass into Lacazette, pass into Martinelli, goal. And that's just huge gaps from lack of rhythm in the way in which you want to play. And perhaps I would suggest a little bit of naivety from the coaching staff. I would have said, let's stick with a low block. Let's work on our counter attack. We're defending our last line really well. Let's work on what we do when we get the ball now, rather than trying to re-establish a completely different style that we'd not really done very well at in the first 10 minutes of the game, and that we had no rhythm in whatsoever.
And on the goal, I think on Twitter you'd mentioned gaps between. It was Rice and Souček that concerned you on it, because my initial concern was Dawson, and I've seen other people who blame Soufal for letting Martinelli drift.
For me, neither of the defenders are at fault. For me, the clear and most obvious thing is that Lacazette has dropped off the forward line and come into a space where there is an absolute mile between Rice and Souček, which you can't have. Your two central midfielders cannot be that far apart on the pitch. The ball is very far wide left. You're already in the half space with Gabriel on the ball in their half, in the half space. So what is Rice doing almost in the half space on the other side of the pitch? You need to be in the middle, because Souček's going to be able to cover across anything that comes onto the flank. That's what he's there to do, to make a 3-on-2, to force him to go back. Why is Rice all the way on the other side of the pitch? You need to be coming across and helping your fellow central midfielder out. And the other thing is communication. We don't get to hear that. But whether Dawson and Diop have been shouting, Lacazette's dropped off, someone needs to go and get onto him, I don't know. So, either a centre-back has to come out and be with him, a midfielder needs to be with him. You cannot have the opposition number 9 standing with about 15 yards around it. 10 yards, that's probably exaggerated there, but 10 yards in a circle around him to be able to receive the ball and play a pass forward. I think at the point at which Lacazette receives the ball, you cannot complain about anything the defenders do, because there's nothing you can do at that point. Martinelli's got a clean run to get inside Soufal and Dawson. He's much quicker. That's just, if you're asking Dawson to have the same amount of pace as Martinelli, then you're asking for something impossible to happen.
That underlines naivety, I guess, because we may almost, it's like we've come out to play as if we had Zuma and Ogbonna in that team, and forgetting that actually we had Dawson, who was phenomenal in the first half defending his box, and in the second half was quite bad at defending outside of his box.
Precisely this is the point I'm trying to make, is that there's a level of naivety and not looking at it and saying, hey, you know what, the score's still 0-0. Yeah. We've just been battered there, but the score's 0-0. Let's focus on a really dug in away performance now, rather than saying, oh, we're top 4 West Ham, let's go and play Arsenal. Yeah, we weren't playing Arsenal, we were getting battered.
I suppose the flip side of that is, as a manager, how long do you let your team survive? And we were surviving by the end of that, on Craig Dawson always getting there just before Arsenal scored, which is I would guess a riskier approach as well. I mean,
you change things. You drop Rice in possession. You drop Rice deeper and put him between the goalkeeper and the two centre backs and split them wider and say, well, now you've got an extra option. So you're not always punting the ball forward so quickly. You push the fullbacks much higher and wider to allow the two playing either side of Antonio to get closer to him. So when the ball's cannoning off him every time he gets it, there's someone there to pick up the loose pieces. There are several things you can do systemically there that work within the structure you've got established by the players on the pitch that's helping us keep to a 0-0, that aren't completely throwing that out the window and then asking them to do something that they weren't coping with.
Did it work having Fornals seemingly more central for the most part of the first half and Lanzini as the wide left man?
Yes.
Can you understand why do you understand that? Because to me, Fornals has been very, very good defending a fullback throughout his West Ham career, and Lanzini is very, very good at keeping the ball under pressure in the centre of the pitch. So on my first, I mean, it's a very, very layman's basic look, is if you take those two attributes and you think, why has that happened?
Perception of pressing.
Okay.
Is the main reason. Fornals' understanding of when to join Antonio in a 2 and to press in the 4-4-2 shape, and when to drop because the two midfielders are too far apart, and to cut off passes into the centre of the pitch is far better than Lanzini's, evidenced by the first goal. Because Lanzini doesn't spot the fact that the two central midfielders are too far apart and stays in the 4-4-2 shape. If you watch the first half again, you'll see how many times Fornals goes between playing as a striker in the press and playing as a shielding attacking midfielder, blocking up any balls into Lacazette, flat, straight balls through the middle of the pitch. That's why he was in there. And the decision to switch that in the second half is for more security in possession, right? It's because Lanzini was by far the best passer of the ball on the pitch in our team. So it's to say Lanzini can drop in and form a 3 there and to give us a little bit more security on the ball, but it ignores what Fornals was doing defensively really well for us.
Callum, in terms of the attack, an attack that I'm now trying to think if ever threatened in any way at any point during the game, realistically, other than Fornals' great shot. I mean, are we just looking at the fact that if Antonio is playing that badly, it's hard for everyone else to function?
Pretty much, yeah, because we're a team at the minute that is entirely dependent on Antonio because we don't have another option, so we don't have another way to play, really. That's the long and short of it, is that he has to be on form because he is the spearhead of every attacking movement that we have, whether it's carrying the ball up the pitch or expected to take in long balls and lay them off, which I think evidence would suggest that is probably ineffective because his passing's dead and his touch is dead at the minute. So, but we're almost flogging a dead horse with that. But
because the other thing I was going to ask is Antonio, it looks to me, moves out to the right wing before the red card, and then after the red card, he's just playing the whole right channel himself for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, how are you on Bowen up there? Is that? It looked to me as well that the problem with Antonio being out there is you don't get standard wing play, so he's going to ping balls in where you are kind of imbalanced and not very obvious decisions. And is there any point if you've got Bowen up there? Granted, Souček was starting to almost play as a centre
hit
forward.
the box a bit, yeah. Well, one thing that I thought was hilarious on Twitter was that everyone was bemoaning Antonio having a go at him for coming out wide so much, as though it wasn't just a tactical decision. Like, he'd clearly been asked to play the right channel. Whether you agree with that or not, it was a tactical decision. It wasn't, as much as I question his positional awareness at times, it wasn't that he'd just been drifting out wide. Like he had been assigned that task.
To be honest with you, it would be funny because at that point it would have been also that Bowen had just gone, "I'm sick of this. Then I'll play on front." And I don't know if professional footballers very well, but I doubt they just go, "Well, if you're going to do that, I'm going to do this, and we'll see what happens."
Yeah, not so much.
No. It was. I don't know. I think you obviously lose a lot by. Well, I don't know if you do actually by moving Antonio out from the front line because he wasn't really offering anything. And I think we're at a point where we kind of had to roll the dice, and that was probably the right decision. But I just think we probably left Antonio on the pitch for too long. Like, if you're going to take your striker out of striker and play him at right back, you might as well just bring on someone else, because there's no reason for him to be on the pitch. And Ashby came on and he looked far better at right back than Antonio had done for the limited amount of minutes he was there. So ultimately, I think your hand has already been forced because you've gone down to 10 men, and if you're going to roll the dice, you might as well do it properly, kind of thing. And I think we looked quite effective when we had the two up top, to be honest. And when we reverted to having Antonio back up top, it kind of fell apart. I mean, there wasn't much to fall. To be honest, we weren't doing that great, but it was certainly more effective having the three midfielders and the two strikers than it was reverting to some sort of 4-4-1-1 kind of situation.
I'll come to the tactics on that, but we should discuss penalty or not, I suppose, is the question to you two. I mean, Martin Keown is really angry at anyone on Twitter who would criticise him, not realising that he at half-time said Arsenal just need to get the first goal, then they'll get the others, and forgets that he's meant to be a non-biased pundit. But then Moyes has come out and said soft but the right decision. I disagree. Callum, penalty.
I think in the heat of the moment, I was very much, this is not a penalty at all. And whilst I think it's still pretty dubious, and I really don't think it should have been a second yellow regardless, I do think that whilst he got the ball, he did also follow through a lot and was out of control and did go over the ball. And if it was probably anywhere else on the pitch, I know it's such a cliche, but if it happens anywhere else on the pitch, it's probably a foul, and it's probably true. But Yeah, it was soft. I get though that I think you have to expect more from Sufal there. Like, it's not. He arrived in good time, and he's just not done a good tackle that really was quite an easy opportunity to win the ball. He was there. He just had to poke it out, and unfortunately, he just got his technique wrong for me. And he's, as Moyes said, he's asking the ref to make a decision. And when you put yourself in a position where there's some sort of uncertainty, it's generally going to go against you, and especially when you're playing against that Arsenal team with all those fans on top of the ref who's already having a stinking game. It was always going to be given, unfortunately. What do you think, Jack?
It's an Arsenal penalty, isn't it? I mean, that's just what it is. It's not a West Ham penalty. It's not a Brighton penalty. It's not a Wolves penalty. It's not a Norwich penalty. It's an Arsenal penalty. I can understand why it's a penalty, but again, it's an Arsenal penalty. I just, it's infuriating. I've had enough of watching games where none of the other teams in the Premier League, other than the top six, ever get given these decisions.
Yeah.
Any of these marginal calls nearly always come down the other way. And I think that's the right way to ref the game, personally. If you're unsure, don't give it. He's not sure. He stands there for about 3 seconds before he points to the spot. Don't give it. You wouldn't give it if it was anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Give it because it's Arsenal.
My interest on that is, it's very prescient. Rory Smith said on the Monday Night Club, penalties from 2003, it was 1 in every 6 games. It's now 1 in every 3 games a penalty is given. It's talking about thresholds. And I think you look at that, and I don't think in a Sunday league game, these aren't his words, mine. I don't think a Sunday league game you'd expect that to be given. Now, I know it's a kind of fallacy and it's an argument, but you should go back to what you think football fans think penalties are, because generally there's a reason football fans think certain things. Yeah. I mean, there's conspiracy and stuff. And on a simple game, you look and go, well, he's got the ball, he's tackled. I think his shin hits Lacazette, and I think if that had been his studs and his foot, my decision is very different, because I think he's dangerous. At that point, I don't think you're dangerous, because I think you have to accept there will be contact sometimes in tackles.
Yeah.
And if he'd done that with his toe and just flicked it out of the way and then followed through, you'd look, it's a really good last gasp tackle because he's just got a touch to it. So I don't see how the window for the decision changes, because if you get your shin to, I completely understand Moyes' frustration that actually the tackle was quite achievable, and it's a little bit of a panic from Sufal that then means he delays and makes a worse tackle. But the opportunity, it just seems it's very, very easy now for players to win penalties on things that realistically I don't think you get given by a standard referee, and those are the rules of the game.
Well, the theatrics helped, didn't they, as well? Because like Jack's rightly said, he's not given the penalty until he then has a peek round to see if Lacazette's all right, sees that he's doing up Tom Daly on the 6-yard box, and then he's gone, oh, actually, he must be hurt. So therefore, that means it must have been a bad tackle. As if there's a correlation there.
This is what I mean, is you can almost see the fucking thought process, which is that, well, that was untidy, but the ball's gone. Oh, look, Lacazette's really hurt. Pen. Like that is, and it drives me mad, because maybe you say with West Ham, we've got to be a little bit cuter. We've just got to start rolling around on the floor a lot to get more penalties. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's not, maybe we're all being ludicrous by saying this is top six bias. Maybe it's just that the top six are a little bit cuter on those margins. And I
do think we need to do something. I thought there was a few occasions in the game where we were fouled and we stayed on our feet and we didn't get a foul. Whereas if we'd made a fuss, we'd have got a foul. Yeah, and I think there's a level I would actually like us to go to a bit more, where we do occasionally do that. I don't really want to see us diving either. Lacazette, it looked like his leg had been broken, then he got up and took a quite firmly hit, if not particularly well placed penalty.
Yeah. But the key issue here, the penalty is a dubious decision. You can give it, you can't give it. It's fine. The thing is the yellow card. I just cannot wrap my head around why he's given a second yellow there, because he's got the ball. There's a slight issue with the challenge. I assume he's giving the yellow card because he's the last man and he feels backed into a corner because he's given the penalty, so he has to give the yellow card. So just use your head. It's not a yellow. It's never a yellow.
Feel very sorry for Sufal. 2 fouls he made in that game, and they were both given the yellow cards. I don't think either of the yellow cards. You could argue maybe if he'd made one in the first half, he could have gone, well, that's an accumulation in the second. But it's not even.
Yeah.
You can't review those. They can't be rescinded. We will go into our next game, if it goes on at the weekend, with a whole back four that is not first choice. In fact, if you then take Johnson's probably left back first, second choice over Masuaku, he's probably right back second choice. Fredericks is probably right back first, third choice. Ashby's coming in. We are down to kind of what would be maybe our 10th option if we had a defence. It's the kind of thing that I don't know. I don't know why VAR may very well look. We can't overrule it, but there's obviously a level of question. Why not have a look? I don't know why the ref doesn't stop and have a look before he.
No, this is the other thing. It's a pitch side monitor thing. If it's a top 16, 110%. I could almost guarantee you if that happens against a top 6 side, then it's a pitch side monitor review every time that goes to a review. And it just doesn't for teams that are lower down the table or teams with smaller teams. It just never happens.
Well, that's almost the most annoying thing. Is that's over the course of the weekend we saw some seriously dubious penalties that did go to VAR and still got given. So
exactly.
It's just such a mess. Like
I think that's the key thing from a West Ham perspective. The frustration is all the dubious penalties at the weekend. Dawson's perhaps is the most obvious one out of all of them if you're looking for a penalty, and I still don't think Dawson's one is a penalty, but if you're comparing all of them against each other, then Dawson's is the one that's most likely a penalty. That's not given, the rest are. And then you get to the Arsenal game, and if you compare the Dawson one with the Soufal one, I mean, that's just Dawson's penalty is 10 times more of a penalty than the Soufal and Lacazette one.
So after the red, we change a system. We're actually quite brave. We don't try and protect a 1-0. I don't know if that helps because Fabianski makes a fantastic save as well, so we're still in the game. Nothing to lose, Jack. But we went out to try and get the goal.
Yeah, and I actually think with 10 men we played really well. I genuinely think that period of the game went pretty well. The 4-3-2 that we went to, or 4-3-1-1, was really, really nice. It caused Arsenal a lot of problems. I think Antonio did a relatively reasonable job of playing the entire right flank on his own. He creates one really, really, really good chance by dribbling past his man and firing a low cross in for Bowen. If Bowen keeps his head there, he pops it back into Lanzini, who has got acres of space inside the box, probably about 15 yards out to shoot, with no one able to get out to him and press him. So I'm not going to say that would be a goal, but it would be an extremely good chance for a goal. Instead, Bowen's 5 yards in front of the near post and tries to somehow whip that into the near post space. I don't know how he thinks he's ever scoring that. But yeah, Antonio creates that chance through his brilliant work down the right side, and I think there were a number of promising openings that we created with that system. Again, let down by final ball. Again, let down by decision making when it comes to that last pass. I think Fornals did a really good job of playing as a third central midfielder, and every time I see him do it, I start wondering why we don't see more of that. We're having issues in build-up. We're having issues in keeping hold of the ball. The midfield's not doing a great job of progressing it. And then Fornals goes in there when we have 10 men and does a really good job. So what would have happened if we'd done it when we had 11 men? So yeah, I think he did really well in there. Rice does a fantastic job at marshalling the whole central space on his own. Souček becomes really useful in the box, getting up despite the gaps that's going to expose at the back. So yeah, I think that whole period of the game went really well, right up until he decided to take Antonio and put him straight back up front, and we went to a 4-4-1 and conceded immediately again. And I think the two times we've conceded goals in the game, I don't think you can blame Moyes for this. I do understand the reasons why he's changed system both times, but that we've conceded within less than 5 minutes after a system change both times. So there has to be some questions asked about whether they were the right decisions and whether the players we've got can do the things that he's asking them to do. I don't think Ben Rama did a very good job when he came on. I couldn't understand really why Ben Rama came on. I thought if you're going to play someone close to a striker, Bowen's going to be up there, then why is Vlasic not coming on? I don't really understand what the point in buying him is if you don't bring him on in that situation. Ashby did great when he came on. I think that's the other thing that's worth mentioning. Offered himself as a really great option down the right-hand side. And yeah, had Souček been able to see him, I know this was at 2-0 after the Arsenal second, which comes from some ridiculously lax play in possession from Ben Rama again. But if Souček gets his head up, then Ashby's got a massive amount of space on the right side and is pretty much thrown on goal. But instead, Souček shapes the shoot and gets fouled by Partey just before he does it. So some really positive things with 10 men. And the main takeaways maybe from that are that we look quite secure with 3 as a flat 3 in midfield. And we also can handle playing with someone else up front that's not Antonio. Bowen did a good job up there. Much better job than Antonio had been doing for the whole game. So, you know, this kind of sense that there's nothing else we can do despite plug away with the same 11 that isn't getting results at the moment. I disagree. One player light forced us to change the system, and then we were in a game against Arsenal.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with the takeaway of a 3-man midfield being an option we should really explore, even with 11 players on the pitch. And I think it's twofold as well, in the sense that A, it gave us way more control over the midfield, but I also think it can give us an option in build-up, in the sense that if you look at the numbers, when we've played a back 3 with Diop, Dawson, Zuma, the number of long passes that they take are about 1 per game, whereas yesterday Diop had 9, and that's basically because he doesn't have an extra centre back there as an option to offload that ball to and then bring the midfield back into the game to build up from the back. He's so unconfident by what he's surrounded by that he instead decides to just kick it into touch, basically all the way up the pitch, and then give them possession back because Antonio can't take it under control and recycle the ball. Whereas if we play 3 in midfield, you have Rice, who can then essentially drop in and play as that third centre back in build up. Gives Diop or Dawson an option to go short, and then we've got basically the best progressor of the ball in the team there on the ball, who can then look ahead of him to either Fornals or Lanzini or Souček, and then the build-up players suddenly become far more of an option than just having to kick it long. And I would imagine if there's any player in the team that any player is happy to pass it to under pressure, it's probably Rice, because he's by and far and away the best player in the team. And I would imagine that everyone agrees with that. So they'd be more than happy to pass the responsibility of ball progression onto him, and we've seen that he can do it. So I think it's not it just seems so obvious to try that, particularly in the position we're in, because we can't even play 3 centre backs at the minute, because we don't have 3 fit centre backs of first team quality. So I'm sure Moyes would probably be thinking about playing a back 5 if he could, with wing backs and 3 centre backs, but he's come out and said we lose a lot in midfield if we play Rice as a starting centre-back. But you don't have to, because you can play 3 midfielders, but he can drop in as and when needs be, and then can have 3 men in midfield when we need that. And it just seems an obvious, not necessarily a fix, but something we should at least try. There's no guarantee that it would fix the problem, but it's better than trying to persist with a half second string unit that can't do the things that the first team can do. Why not try something different? It seems the obvious antidote to a clear problem.
And just lastly on this, before we move on, what adds to the case really is the fact that we've got a lot of players who are flexible between playing on the left and at 10, which means you can play a 4-3-3, but you can also play a midfield diamond with
really
the same 11
diamond
players on the pitch. And Antonio's really struggling, so you can put Bowen close to him as a striker, and then Ben Rama or Vlasic would be entirely comfortable playing that 10 role behind and then filtering out to the left and Bowen coming to the right when we're defending. So you have all the same security of a 4-5-1 when you're defending, or a 4-4-2, because Fornals can go out and you have exactly the same defensive setup, but you allow yourself to play with 2 up front, and Bowen can be close to Antonio, which you'd imagine would help him quite a lot. And you give yourself the 3 in build up as well. So yeah, it does seem a bit blindingly obvious at the moment.
Because it feels, I've got a mild inclination that I'd quite like to see them put Kral in there and give Rice some more freedom, because he arguably was our best attacking player against Burnley, but I think that's probably going a little too far with the personnel we have. I do want to say, with breaking news, is that we are not playing this Saturday. The new Norwich game has been, Norwich have called for a postponement, and that game has been called off. One of many, I think, because I think Everton's game at the weekend, whoever they are playing against, has also been called.
That's actually great news for us.
I was going to
It's
say,
really
in terms of
fantastic
fitness,
news
it's
for us.
brilliant.
Yeah, it's Everton Leicester. It's because we've got that League Cup game, which I'd imagine the League Cup game goes ahead because Tottenham were trying to play the Leicester game. I think it was Leicester who get it, but it gives us a bit of rest. I mean, Tottenham, I think, have come out of it quite well, but it's not anyone can do anything really about it. It's one of those things that's going to have to be kept an eye on over the next few days, because if there's going to be this many games cancelled, there may be a wholesale set of cancellations coming soon and a break.
Yeah.
But that's more than we can pontificate on right now, because I don't think we quite have. I don't have any influence in the corridors of power within the Premier League. I
have football analysis. I don't have COVID analysis. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's just not my. I mean, Jurgen Klopp's the best voice of that at the moment. So then we come to the 0-0 with Burnley. So that's 2 Premier League games in a row we haven't scored. It was an odd game, the Burnley game, and a game where which we were kind of the dominant team, but we weren't highly threatening. We dealt with most of what Burnley could throw at us, but it also felt like by the end of it, you say a 0-0 was a fair result, Callum.
Yeah, I think so. As they say, it's a game of two halves. First half we were poor. Second half we were dominant, I thought. So based on that very shallow analysis, I think a draw has to be
good numbers work, mate. That's 50-50. Well done.
Has to be seen as a fair result. It was, we just lacked any cutting edge in the final third, really, and we didn't really ever look like scoring. I didn't feel anyway. We were close enough around the edge to score, but there was never a moment where I thought, oh, it's coming in, because I just didn't have any confidence that it would happen. Unfortunately, it was just the way the day went.
It's funny for me. The only time I did feel actually like we really broke anywhere and looked like we might do something was with Benrahma, who was also maybe at his most frustrating. He's almost most frustrating he's ever been for us. It was a game in which he caused problems that he then solved for Burnley himself by making awful choices. And we discussed this days prior, me and you, Jack, where me almost feeling like you keep on the chaos because there was at least something happening. But actually, as a manager, you'd rightfully say, you look at him and think, well, every time he gets in those positions, he's not producing, so I can't keep him on. And that is certainly where it fell with Moyes in that game. But other than that, it was Rice. It was a game where Rice could have won, and the game that maybe Declan Rice deserved to win, and the other 10 players deserved to draw.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. Declan Rice's second half, probably the best 45 minutes we've seen from anyone all season. Just ridiculous. The amount of wonderful progressive runs, dribbles into the box, balls into the box, passes between the lines, everything and anything you'd want from a defensive midfielder and more, really. So, I mean, he was remarkable. Briefly on Benrahma, I completely understand the point of he's getting into the right areas and therefore you leave him on. The issue is, like you say, he's not producing, but really this repeating issue now of, and I've looked at it on my Twitter. I posted some videos that kind of show exactly this repeating problem that he's having, which is receiving on his right foot in situations where he can drive on the outside, and to make yourself difficult to defend against as a winger. If you always do exactly the same thing when you receive the ball in space, it becomes really easy for the opposition fullback. So in the example I posted on Twitter, it's almost remarkable how Lowton can slow down before Benrahma's received the ball, despite being in a 1v1 with a player quicker than him, because he knows that Benrahma's going to dribble inside and run straight at him where he is, rather than force him to do something he's uncomfortable doing. So in terms of Benrahma looking in the long term and how he's going to progress his game and how he's going to keep his place in the team, show a little bit more flexibility, show a little bit more willingness to ask people to do things they're uncomfortable doing. Don't just try and do the one thing you know how to do well, because people are anti-stratting you. People know how to stop you from doing that, quite obviously. So yeah, taking players on the outside is something he's going to have to learn to do, and learn to do quickly if he wants to keep his place in the team. And actually, the one moment he did it was the best moment he had all game. Is that little turn, which was great.
Yeah.
And took him down the outside. And the fact that he did it look how shocked they are. They're all out of position because they're like, oh, fuck, what's he doing now? He never does that. So he has to show a little bit more flexibility in what he does. And actually in that example, that brings us back to kind of Antonio at the moment. And that was pretty ridiculous.
I was
running in the cover shadow.
so angry watching that. And you're watching a man stand still, and he stands still for quite a long time actually, and demands a pass that, I mean, you know, Benrahma physically can't make. There's just and it's not just that he stands still, because I can understand, I'm the cutback option, but it's that it's an impossible pass, and he doesn't do the really obvious and the striker move you have to do. If Benrahma is given an option to play that across goal, it's such a better percentage pool, isn't it? It doesn't matter if he gets it right to some extent. He can fire that across and get it wrong, and it can go in. It can.
Well, Antonio denied himself 2 tap-ins in the game, and they were both when we got overloads on the left side. One was with Benrahma in that chance, and the other one was Masuaku got away down the left another time, and all he's got to do, he's actually in front of Charlie Taylor, and all he's got to do is stay in front of Charlie Taylor, and he has a tap-in. And for some unfathomable reason, he shifts his body position because he can feel the pressure coming from behind, lets Charlie Taylor run across him. He actually turns his shoulder out to allow the player to come across him. And then the cross comes in and Charlie Taylor clears it away and sort of turns around and goes, cheers. Thanks for that. I've got no idea, because all he had to do was keep his shoulder in front, and he's got to tap it.
It's almost as if you find a player whose success has come from how brilliantly he was coached in Benrahma, arguably, and he got coached to be very, very good at Brentford. And maybe you've got quite the opposite there, who's Antonio, who seems to have been almost uncoachable, has come across as a very natural talent, and he gets, you know, heralded for that in the same way Jamie Vardy does, but he hasn't got the basics to then run across goal or stop someone doing that, because he doesn't know his position.
The thing is he did have the basics. I mean, I remember that game where he scored 4 against Norwich, and the fourth in that game where he gets across 2 defenders and demands a pass from Fredericks and taps it in at the near post. That's a brilliant striker's goal. So he knows how to do it. He's just lost it. I don't know where it's gone for him, but he's just completely failing at all the, like you say, the most basic things you need to do as a striker.
It's because all of his decisions are his decisions, I guess. And if he's in a bad run of form, he's continuously making the wrong decisions. I suppose it's hard to argue with. I mean, other things I thought to take from the game, and other things I thought to take recently, would be that it looks like we are shifting at times. David Moyes has thought 4-2-2-2 is an option at the moment. I don't know whether that is coming from. I thought that we came in the Chelsea game. I think it came in the European game, so it looked like it did again towards the end of Burnley. All about Bowen getting close to Antonio, I would guess, which is, we are now looking to talk about embedded problems, an embedded problem that is our only striker. We're having to fix a problem around him, which is, I suppose, an absolutely ridiculous scenario to be in when you could just not play him, I guess, Callum.
Yeah, I think it's coming to that point now as well, where it is, I think more and more people are of the opinion that maybe there is now a point where he does just have to get dropped. And I think it follows on from the point of us saying that he seems to have just lost his natural instinct. And like you say, if it's kind of almost muscle memory, and he's continually doing all this bad stuff, it's only going to become a habit, and you need to drop him so that he can, almost like a shock to the system, and get it out and focus on training him on the training ground. And this is how you used to do things. This is what you should be doing, and then come back with a fresh approach. And who knows, but we don't have that luxury at the minute, because we just don't have the alternatives, which is rubbish. But I think, yeah, you're right to flag up the 2 up top thing. I think sometimes it can look like we're playing 2 up top when really we're just pressing with 2, and then in attack we fall back to just having the normal shape. But it has become more common. We have seen Bowen kind of partnering Antonio, and whilst I don't think it's worked as effectively as we might hope, largely just because of the poor form of Antonio, it does excite me a little bit looking forward, thinking that we might explore the possibility of playing with 2 strikers when we bring in another 1 or maybe 2 eventually by the summer strikers, because that would add a whole different option. If things aren't working, we can rather than just say, heck, let's try 2 up top with a a winger and an out of form striker, we will then at some point in theory be able to go, hey, it's not working, let's go two up top with hopefully a more informed Antonio and an actual striker. And that is an exciting possibility. I mean, it's very much silver linings after a bad week, but hey, we've got to sprinkle some positivity in there. And I think some of the names that have come up as well kind of lean towards that as being something the recruitment department have been maybe assigned as a task to look at, is a striker who could possibly partner an Antonio or someone of that ilk, like the Cabral's, the more physical, like dominant, basically who you can imagine a partnership working well with, kind of thing. Is something that I've noticed anyway.
That 4-2-2 thing, I should go to you as more and more, and I hate saying it, it's really annoying. And my formation guru, my tactical manager, I mean, I don't know if that might just be something that Callum was rightly pointing out, it's just a press thing and I'm not really paying attention once that press ends, or not. Or at least is it looking like a viable option if it is there?
There's obviously somewhat a keenness to explore an option where there's two up front. I'm not sure whether a 4-2-2 is the right way to approach that. It is something that we've seen. I would go back to what we've just talked about and say that adding an extra body into midfield probably enables you to do that a little bit more. Whether we have the personnel to play more of a 4-4-2 or 4-2-2, I'm not entirely certain. And it depends how much defensive security you leave behind. So I think kind of only applicable in some games. But the instinct to get someone closer to Antonio is correct at the moment because of the lack of fixes further back. I would at this point kind of point everyone back in the direction of construction is the key problem here. Look at Antonio's form and look at when we've lost Ogbonna and then look at when we've lost Cresswell and map the two things together and you'll see the reasons why these things are happening. So still for me, as much as it might infuriate everyone, I would prioritize looking at a left centre back and getting Cresswell back fit or getting a left back who can play like Cresswell in over getting another striker, because the striker we've got is very, very good when he's playing in the system that works for him. And at the moment, there isn't a striker in the world that's going to perform remarkably well when you're literally punting the ball aimlessly forwards every 5 minutes. They don't exist. I don't care who you put up there. They're not going to be able to work miracles, get on the ball, spin, beat two players, and then score a goal. That player doesn't exist, and it certainly don't exist at West Ham's level. So fixing the issues in construction to allow us to approach the final third with more consistency is more of an issue and a more pressing issue to get right. And then you look at games like the Burnley game and say, well, our decision making in the final third isn't good enough there. And then maybe we do need an alternative option, a striker that's a little bit better in the box, more of a poacher who can help us more in games like that. Or you just look at it and say, put Jesse Lingard in that game and we win 3-0.
I was just about to come to it, but I said in my match report, I called Sideburn Rumour. I don't know if I brought this up earlier.
You did. No, you did not in this podcast, but
not in this podcast. The walking advertisement for Jesse Lingard, and I thought that it's looked recently. I thought in the Arsenal game actually even more so, because whilst it was some decision making Burnley in Arsenal game, we needed someone who could actually get that ball and probably wouldn't have been concerned and could have countered. And I think there is almost we need a player who's got the arrogance to say, no, I'm good enough to deal with this. It doesn't matter. And I don't know sometimes if some of our players just don't have that. I mean,
without banging my head on the desk, that's why we bought Vlasic. So just bring him on, for crying out loud. I mean, he's there to do a very similar job to the job that Lingard did. So why in a game like that, when you're playing 4-3-2 and countering and having some success, but it's being undermined by the fact that you don't have a dynamic 10 to play alongside your striker, why would you not bring on the most dynamic 10 who's got the most ability at doing that thing to assist in that situation? Why would you go 4-4-1-1, bring on a player that loses the ball all the time and stick the one player who's playing really badly back up front? Mind-boggling decision.
What it's as good a time as any to bring up Vlasic, because actually Callie was quite good against Burnley when he came on.
Yeah, man, he was brilliant. I think I'm right in saying that he created more chances than, or at least as many chances as our best player on the pitch. Yeah, exactly. So and he did it in what, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Just I don't get what more he has to do in the limited cameos that he's been given to be given more of an opportunity, if that makes sense. Like,
it is difficult
like
for
you
us to
say,
adjust, isn't it?
his Burnley performance was great, and it was, like Jack's rightly pointed out, it was so clear that is the exact player we needed to bring on. And it's not even as though Moyes shouldn't have the confidence, because his previous time out, he was the best player in the team. So if anything, he should be getting given more time. And it was just so infuriating. But yeah, the Burnley game, he was definitely one bright spark. His creation was great. It was a positive decision to bring him on. It was exactly what the game needed. We created, some chances that on another day would have been put away. That last chance where I think it was pretty much the last kick of the game where Souček
was the last kick of the game.
Souček was leaning back as much as he could possibly do.
That's it. It was just
he had such an easy pass
to Bowen.
Such an easy. It's exactly the same thing. Both games. Watch them both side by side, if you like. Against Arsenal, it's cut back to him, and he's got an easy pass to Ashby to play him through on goal. And against Burnley, same thing. It gets cut back to him, and he's got a really easy pass through to Bowen to play Bowen through on goal. Both times he leans back and tries to take a shot that he's never ever scoring.
Do you think if just before we carry on, just quickly, like if it was Soufal in that position rather than Ashby, if he was still on the pitch, do you think he makes that pass because of the relationship between Souček and Soufal? You don't think he just doesn't see it?
He just doesn't see it. He just doesn't see it. He's not got the presence of mind in those situations. And actually, if there's something that's a slight issue and a slight concern of the last two games, is I've marked Souček down for not being calm enough, I think 4 times, over two in each game. So just some really very weird. I was one in Arsenal that was really, really weird, where Ashby plays the ball back to him. He's got loads of time, and he tries to just thump it away and misses the ball completely under no pressure.
Mess.
And it's just like, what's going on with you? I don't. What's that all about? Why are you doing that? There's been a couple of instances recently where, and I think maybe it's we're not scoring, we're not playing very well. There's a bit of pressure suddenly on. We were in the top 4. What's going on? We're dropping out the top 4. The teams behind us are starting to play really well. So suddenly there's this increased pressure. So when we're getting into the right situations, then it's not just Souček. It'd be wrong to pick him out. It's Souček, it's Ben Rumour, it's Antonio, it's Bowen, it's all of them. That people are just making really rash and poor decisions.
And you mentioned before we started, kind of in our little meeting, this is December, and last year December, I think we got 1 win, 2 draws, and 2 defeats.
I think that's right. Yeah.
If in fact, when we in Cal talk about it's almost mirror. They're saying we drew with Palace at home, we drew away 0-0 at Southampton, we drew with Brighton, and those results have stayed the same this year. Granted, not all in the same month, but we have a small squad, and I mean, Moyes might like a small squad. It might work for many things, but when it comes to these, it's awful period for footballers that will never change because of the money invested around the Christmas period. It tells.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's been brilliant being in the top 4. But one thing it has done, particularly for the fans, I guess less so for the players because they're professionals, but I think we've kind of been lured into this area where we're now considering ourselves as a top 4 team, and like we have a right to be there because we've earned it on merit, but we don't have a squad to compete with the teams around us when you hit this part of the season where fixture congestion is an issue. And whereas the Cities and the Liverpools can rotate with top quality players, we're having to bring in like youth players to make their debuts who they've done well, but probably aren't ready to play consistently at this level of football. Definitely not. Some of them haven't even been out on loan, so they've not even played senior football before. And if you think the players that have come in, the Diops, the Masuakus, these are sort of artifacts of a team from seasons ago where we were struggling to stay in the league and just about survived, and then we've since replaced them, and we've become this team that can kick it with the big boys at the top, qualify for Europe. And when you start to have to replace your starters with the players that had played in a worse quality team, you're going to get, as we've said, something in between that level, and that's probably what we're performing at the minute, where we're not winning every game. But really, before the month started, if you said, I probably would have predicted a lot of the results that we've got, rightly or wrongly. And it's probably about where I'd expect us to be. I don't think we're good enough at the minute. As much as West Ham fans would love to believe it, we are not a top 4 team. We don't have the squad. We don't have the money to compete at that level. Yes, we've got some brilliant players. A lot of them are injured. This is just kind of the level we're at the minute. And I think it's worth remembering, because it's very easy after the start of the season we've had to get on top of the players and be like, this is not acceptable. And yes, Rice came out, and yes, yesterday's performance was unacceptable. It wasn't good. But I think we have to take a step back and look at it and be like, actually, do you know what? We are still 5th. We did excellently in the Europa League. We are still in the cup. We've got to the quarterfinal. We've beat most of the big teams. We've won local derbies. We've beat Spurs. We beat Chelsea. There's a lot of positivity. I think it's worth remembering. I think,
and these players got us there, so stick with them. We wouldn't be here without them. You know, the 2 things I'd pick up here are, we're not Man City. You don't get 2 teams that are top 6 competitive. Wanting 2 teams that are top 6 competitive is ludicrous. It's not going to happen. So get over it. It's never going to happen. You're never going to be able to rotate, not on the budget we have. It's simple as that. You're not going to be able to rotate top 6 competitive players into our team. Who's the player we all want? Jesse Lingard. He can't get a game, can't buy a game at a team that are below us. The reason we are where we are is because we're doing incredibly well, but because teams who have much deeper pockets than ours are massively underachieving. And the teams we're playing in this period, if Arsenal pick up a few injuries, £80 million Nicola Pepe can come into the team. They can afford to deselect their captain on a disciplinary basis. One of the strikers with probably the biggest reputation, and one of the biggest reputation players in the league. These teams are massively underachieving, and we've done amazingly to fill that gap, but they can cope with this period. It happens every year. The top 6 teams cope with December. December, for any team that's not in that club, who doesn't have 22 players who can compete at that level, points away, wins at home. We've won games at home, and we got a point at Burnley. Granted, we didn't get a point at Arsenal. That's fine. That's absolutely fine, because when you go away to a top 6 team in December, those are the toughest games you get all season. So everyone keep your hair on. Let's keep winning games at home where we can. And I would have said it's all about the Norwich game now. And if we win the game against Norwich, then I would say December's still going kind of as best as you could hope, really, as best as you can hope for a squad like ours. But yeah, I think it's going fine. And I think you've got to look to January and look to re-energize. It was exactly the same last season. We ran out of steam this time of year. We brought Lingard in, and then suddenly we looked like a new team. Afterwards, we went away to Villa, and then bang, okay, West Ham are back. So it's the same thing this year. Let's get through January. Let's get through December. Look to bring in some new faces in January. Look to freshen things up, and get going again.
I suppose the only frustration is that a couple of things that you would look at have happened to us are things you would predict have happened in September, and the summer, and could have dealt with. So the Antonio issue, we were all waiting for an issue with his form and his tiredness to happen and his fitness, and it has happened. And I guess that's, for me, that's why I'm frustrated. I'm not frustrated in a way of dropping out of the top 4, because actually I thought we'd finish this season about 10th to 8th-ish, because Europe was going to absolutely drag the life out of us. We've done really well to make sure it hasn't. But you could look at one of those issues and think, well, we could have solved that, because if I can see it coming.
I think the thing that's distressed everyone really is that it's not been an Antonio injury. It's been a drop in form. Yeah, of course, there are things we could have done in the summer. Of course, we could have brought in a backup striker. Maybe we could have pushed harder for Jesse Lingard. But I kind of hate saying this, but you just don't get everything if you're West Ham. You can't go into a season fully prepared without taking risks. And really, I'm a huge fan of the fact that the club is doing things sustainably at the moment.
Yeah,
I wouldn't want us to be, if we didn't have a player that we were happy with as a striker option. Who were we looking at? What was it? En-Nesyri and all of these people. If we didn't have someone that we were happy spending 40 million quid on to be the next striker to partner Antonio, and we weren't entirely sure, and people go, "Oh, Moyes is too slow," and all the rest of that. We're 5th. I would prefer the fact that we didn't get a striker that we weren't sure on. And we spend more time identifying the right player than we go and splurge loads of money now. Potentially it doesn't work out, and then we're back in the relegation battle in 2 seasons.
Does that hold if we then don't get a striker in January? Because at some point,
Yes.
it's because I was at some point, long-term thinking, if you're missing short-term opportunity, you're hurting yourself long-term.
The long-term thinking for me still remains, look at the first 11. The priority is a long-term replacement for Ogbonna because of his age and because of his injury, a long-term replacement for Cresswell because of his age, because of his fitness issues, and then a striker. A striker still isn't the top of the pile for me. It's just not. You've
We
got
not have
Antonio.
to.
Look, if there's some look, me and Cal have talked about this a lot, and you'll see the work we're doing for January. In January, we've got a bunch of writing coming out on the issues up front and recruitment up front. I think personally, the best thing that West Ham could do would be to sign a short-term 2-year option of someone who's happy to play second fiddle. I'm not looking for someone who's going to be the next Antonio. I'm looking for someone who can do a job at Arsenal away when Antonio's not in form, or in the Burnley game, Antonio's not in form. Right, let's put someone like Ilis Bebu, Carl Toko Ekambi. There are players out there who can come in who aren't going to be world beaters, who would be available for sub 10 million, sub 15 million, and would do a job up front for us. I'm not looking for that marquee signing. And for me, it's not a priority. For the main reason why it's not a priority is because there are players in the squad who should be able to do that. Yarmolenko's there. I don't like him very much, but he's there. Bowen's there. Vlasic is there. There are players, as Perkins in the under-21s. I know he shouldn't be forced to be ready, but there are players there who can do that. So it's about the manager having the confidence to say, okay, he's not performing. Let's put someone else in up front. With left back, there isn't anyone there because Masuaku's not good enough, and there isn't someone who can do what Cresswell does. With left centre half, there isn't a left-footed centre half there. That's much more of an issue for me. Much more of an issue.
Having discussed defenders, the biggest link this week, really, the Standard are very confident on this. There's been at least 2 articles, maybe 3 in the week, whereas other names, you'll be very happy, Cal, even to see that Sinisi was linked by 90th minute today.
He?
Yeah,
Jeez!
Unfortunately, their track record is about as good as mine in terms of his knowledge of football, which is very much, if I Google his name plus West Ham, I might also find a link that someone said.
Yeah.
But so, and at the Standard, slightly different. They don't usually go big on things of their own unless they've got a bit of a feeling. So Nate Phillips, Nathaniel Phillips, around 10 to 15 million is your guy for this week, Cal.
Yeah, I think it probably makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's not, probably wouldn't be my first choice, but he's a competent defender who wants to move, which I think is probably a big factor for Moyes, because he wants to bring in players like Lingard last season who really want to play football and want to be part of something. And I think he ticks that box. Another box that he definitely ticks is that he's extremely good in the air, which I think that's probably the first thing Moyes noticed and was like, "Yep, we're interested in him." I think I'm right in thinking I've not looked at his numbers for this season because he's barely played, but he played over 2,000 minutes last year, and I think I'm right in saying that he completed the most aerial duels per 90 across the whole of Europe. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I saw something like that the other day.
Yeah, I looked earlier, which, I mean, you almost think that in a recruitment meeting, someone says that to Moyes and he's like, "Yeah, get him in. 6'3", most aerial duels won in Europe. He can do a job." But yeah, no, that's it. That's it. He is a right-sided centre back, which for me, a left-sided centre back is more of a priority for the reasons we talked about, the lack of build-up play. We have Dawson, who yesterday proved that he can do a serviceable job defending the box. And left side is where we really are missing someone in Ogbonna, because we just can't play the ball out. And to be fair, I was quietly pleased with Nat Phillips' passing metrics. I think he averages just shy of 90% pass completion rate last season.
Quite good on the ball.
Is actually pretty good. One who I was really surprised we've not been linked, but another Liverpool centre back, that Ben Davies guy they signed from Preston. He's like the most progressive centre back in the world. He's ridiculous. He's absolutely killing it in the Championship, which is great for him. But yeah, good in the air, surprisingly progressive, which is obviously a nice addition. He's certainly a better passer than Craig Dawson. So one thing we always say is that if you bring someone in, it should be an improvement on someone else in the squad. Otherwise, what's the point in bringing them in? And if you're thinking Craig Dawson, he's not young, he's decent, but he's not great. We've got Zuma, who's the first choice, and it makes sense that Phillips kind of slots in above Dawson, below Zuma, and then when Dawson leaves, you've got Phillips as your backup right-sided centre-back, essentially. And I think he's happy to play that role, and he knows he's going to get minutes this season because of the size of the squad. So for me, I'd be pretty happy if we saw him come in. He really fits the mould of what Moyes likes, particularly if you go as he has so much faith in Craig Dawson, probably more than anyone else in the fan base. And if that's what he wants, he's got to tune out of Dawson, and Phillips is probably a better player. So it's kind of exciting to think about what he could get out of Phillips looking forward. And it's just the right profile. And if it doesn't work, you can probably sell him for a decent fee anyway. It's fine. It works all around for me, really.
But Moyes, I actually, this is one of the areas where I just really trust Moyes. His identification of centre backs throughout his managerial career has largely been really, really good. And when he gets a team playing in that style that he modelled with Everton, he's generally had a set of 4 excellent centre backs to choose between. I remember there are a lot of really great players at Everton. Jagielka, Distin, Lescott was there for some time. Yobo was there. These were not all players who arrived with huge reputations, but turned into really excellent Premier League centre backs. So if there's an area where I really trust our manager, it's on picking a centre back who can do a really good job in a Moyes team. So yeah, Nat Phillips looks like one of those players. So this is one that I'm quite pleased about.
Pretty sure I saw him brief turn in the box against Milan the other week and go between 2 players to play out of defence, and that puts him ahead of Craig Dawson in many ways. So
that's what I was saying. This guy, he's underrated in terms of his on the ball ability. He's quite good on the ball. Where I have some concerns is his tackling on the ground. He's in the air, brilliant. On the ball, quite happy. I'm not so certain about when he's getting dribbled at. How good is he? Yeah,
63% defensive duel rate is not that great for your centre half.
Well, I think that's why he doesn't play regularly for Liverpool.
Yeah.
Different strokes for different folks. He'd be playing in a very different type of team, I guess, if he came in. His halfway line quite as often as he maybe is when you're playing for Liverpool.
That's the reason why Craig Dawson doesn't get asked to defend against people running at him very regularly. Well, I don't think Nat Phillips would be asked to do that at West Ham.
No, it has showed in that Arsenal game when Lacazette did that trick that failed, that did for Dawson against Wolves the other day when the player moved the ball in a slightly different direction. He just took him out again. It was just another one of those things. Just, well, if you're going to move the ball, then I'm just going to foul you. So that is what I do. Well, that's very much where we end on for that. A frustrating week, but not too many signs or not reasons to actually feel that fearful. Some to feel cheerful if you look across the metrics and across our form in general. Yeah, that's what I end on. Yeah. It's what we go with it feels like a real West Ham. Yeah, after all. So thank you for joining us. And until next time, which will be after Christmas. We're not previewing today because with COVID, you've got Norwich off. We could have the Tottenham game off. I suspect we might even have the Boxing Day game off. We don't know. So we will come back after a Christmas period. So for those of you who celebrate, Merry Christmas and good night.
Right, so we're here in the offices of a Late Late Show with the host of a Late Late Show, James Corden.
Hi.
Big West Ham fan.
Yes. And big knees up Mother Brown man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm regularly on the general discussion page. There's always someone who's got some information, so I love it. Yeah. It's great. Yes, it's excitement surrounded by imminent disappointment. That's what it mostly is.
Get on the forum at kumb.com. Come on, you irons.